Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are coming to you again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, and we are here, rain, shine, sleet, snow, and if the lights go out. John, did you have the lights go out yesterday?
No, that was a surprise. Yes, were you were affected by a limited range blackout, I guess. But,
yeah. So John was living on the high end of town where they don't have these problems.
We've had enough the past couple of years. It's been getting more frequent. You know, we had just a couple gusts of wind a few months ago, and then they went out for 4 hours.
Yeah, they weren't trying to be too fast about fixing the lights. I was really disappointed because I've been waiting all week, John, for them for Showtime to bring the fights on. I'm a boxing fan. And I was waiting all week. I couldn't hardly wait for the 14th. I'm going to watch these three major events in a 154-pound class. And they had all 6 of the top. That's the super welterweight division. And I couldn't hardly wait to get to the 14th. And around 7 o'clock that night, Saturday night, the fight comes on at 9. At 7 o'clock, all the power went off. I was so disappointed. I mean, I kept saying, what is this? Do I need to go to church more than once a week? Do I need to get in there on Wednesday? I need to have a prayer meeting. And it went out just as the fight was going to come on. It didn't come back on until the next day, and I missed everything. And then to compound my misery, the fighter that I was really pulling for in what should have been the main event, but I'm glad it wasn't given what the outcome, is the fighter that I was actually banking on got knocked out in the first round. So, that was the day after the 13th. So we had two 13ths, the first time in my lifetime. Friday the 13th, and then Saturday there was a continuation of the 13th.
Do you know why the Friday the 13th is considered unlucky?
Yeah, what's your version of it?
Well, actually, because I was in Demolay, and we were told that was the day that Jacques Demolay, the last Grand Master of Knights Templars, he and his colleagues were rounded up by the force of the King of France and the Pope, because they're accused of all kinds of infamous acts, and then it was used to excuse the king did it so he could get property owned by the order, and so they actually tortured these poor men today, and they burn them at the stake outside the Cathedral Notre Dame out there. There's like a little islet right outside of it, and they burn them right there outside on the stake there, right outside that was in 1307 though. They were arrested Friday 13th to 1307. That's when they were arrested, but they were tortured for some of them for a few months before they were finally executed by being burned at the stake. Okay,
now that John has given me the more modern version of it, let me give him the more ancient version. And the ancient version is that during the time of Osiris, who was one of the 16 crucified saviors, there's a book out written by Kersey Grace called The 16 Crucified Saviors. And Osiris, who was one of the 16 crucified saviors, and there were some others, the Christians, Jesus, the Christ, and there are some others even beyond that. Those personalities or those personages in history. And Osiris was carved up into, he was torn into 14 different parts. This is a lunar story, as most of these stories are astronomical as well as historical. You can look at an astronomical component to it, and the 14 parts would be the 14 days of incline, the 14 days of decline of the moon. And then there is no moon during the next 3 days, and then there's a resurrection of the moon on the third day, starting the next month of the next month. So Osiris, the humanization of the story that has an astronomical backdrop to it was carved into 14 different parts. They found 13 parts of Osiris's body, but they didn't find the phallic part of his body, which was thrown into the sea and was eaten by the onyx, the catfish. And so you now see why the cat is considered to be the woman's body, when the guy talks about cat in the bathroom and all of that sexual stuff, because when in the sexual act, when the woman is in fact engaging the man, it resembles the taking of the man, and so it would be the catfish symbolically taking on the phallic member of Osiris. They found 13 parts and couldn't find the 14th part, and that is a part on the steeple of the churches, where it is now there looking as to resemble the phallic member, and is there standing in attention to look for the member that has been lost, and is still looking on the church. If you notice, the church has the phallic member and then the cross on top of it. So it's a combination of a couple of religious ideas and principles found there. So there's an older idea to it as well, and we can take you the story and run with that.
I don't think I've ever heard that account like that. I mean, from what I heard about Osiris being pulled to pieces, ripped to pieces. I remember hearing about that, but I didn't know that would have been the reason why the cross. I mean, with that, of course, that was put later, so the Christians would say that was like symbolic thing of Christianity triumphing over that other previous god too.
Yeah, that it is paying homage to its pagan roots, and when I say this to Christian groups, I simply don't contradict anything. I think it's complementary too, in terms of the transition, in terms of a higher ideal, going from one idea to a higher ideal. And I think that the Christianization of the story in some ways is a refinement of the resurrection story in the refinement of Jesus the Christ, who would have been born in 4 BC according to Christian calendar.
Well, see, years ago, I mean, C.S. Lewis was, C.S. Lewis, the apologist, was facing a lot of criticism because a lot of people had said, well, what's in Christianity got all these elements of other religions within it, and he would answer, he said, you should be more concerned if you hadn't had that. He said that's the reason why he thought it was true. Christianity was the true religion, because it did have such a past, and it had so many motifs and symbols that were actually so connectable to other people. And so, I mean, I talk to these New Agers. People call themselves New Agers, and they go on about that. And I think, but I think, what, okay, this one's existed for 2,000 years, and it's gone to all over the world. The ones they are always referencing are ones that are real limited in their scope and to the people they have actually influenced. And I think that shows the universalization of Christianity from the onset shows it was more of a rational approach to religion rather than they're very just tied to a group of people. And
I would say so. And I think that if you look at the Christian story, it raises the question that if you can see resurrection in nature, for example, the flowers in your yard, you notice that it has a falling over during the winter season, and the plant looks like it has died. What it's really doing, it is regenerating itself, and then in the following spring and summer, you see it then within that decay, you see the same flowering again, and it is in fact resurrecting itself. And the question is that if you have resurrection of all other things in the life form, and there is really no death in nature. Nature has 3 different stages. It has creation, it has sustenance. You create life, you sustain life, and you regenerate life. And so this idea of death is not noted by nature. What looks like death is another part of motion, and the decay creates more enrichment for other life forms. And I heard, on this level, I did hear deGrasse. What's the guy's name? The one that is a astrophysicist.
Neil deGrasse.
Neil deGrasse.
Right.
And he says that when he dies, he is not going to be cremated because he wants to be the smorgasbord of the life forms that will in fact feed on his body, as he has been dining on the life forms on the earth, so that he would not be selfish in terms of not allowing himself to be a part of the regeneration process. I don't have that view of how I'm going to be, communed in the after. I'm going to be cremated. But and if that doesn't happen, I'm coming back to hunt some people. But I do understand that, and I have a lot of respect for that. But I have my own orders being given in my plans and things like that. So I do understand what Neil deGrasse is talking about. And the regeneration, the resurrection that Christians are talking about is both astronomical in the sense of how it plays out in the astronomy area. You can see the Jesus story in terms of what occurs in December. We're coming up on December in a couple of months here, so let me just say something about that. That you'll have the star called the star Sirius, or the dog star. Don't forget the dog star is called that because the dog always announced the coming of a visitor or the coming of an arrival. And so they call this the star Sirius, the Solstice star. They'll call that the dog star. And what it does is announce on the 21st of December, which is the first day of winter solstice, it announces that within a period of time, that star coming out will announce the arrival of the birth of the sun, S-U-N. It could also be S-O-N because it's astronomical, but the story has a humanistic, aspect and a religious aspect to it. So that 4 days later, after the winter solstice, you have the birth of the Christ, if you say the Christ story, the birth of Jesus. So December the 25th, they say, was the birth of Christ. Then what happens astronomically is that the sun that was in a state of decline will now begin to gain 10 minutes between December the 25th, the sun, S-O-N, growing up, and between December the 25th and January the 1, the sun will gain 10 minutes. Or the sun, S-O-N, will in fact begin to grow as a child. And it will continue to grow, talking about the S-U-N again. The S-U-N will grow, and it will begin to gain more and more power over the dark forces, the dark forces being Satan or Set, and will continue to gain until the spring equinox. It can happen in March or it can happen in April. By the time it continues to get to the midpoint, which is over the equator, it will cut the equator at the midpoint into half, forming a cross, and then after having equilibrium between day and night, it will then go into period of decline, thus, therefore, the sun being crucified, the S-U-N. Therefore, in the Christian story, the crucifixion will be the crucifixion of Jesus the Christ, and they will have that. Sometimes they'll have Easter in March and they'll have it in April. And all I'm doing is showing here the connection between some other premises that the Christian story, in fact, builds upon. And therefore, it doesn't nullify the story, it validates it. And there's an older treatise to it, but the validation is in terms of the culmination of the story of Jesus the Christ. And I do not go into any contradiction. I think that the story is complementary of the Christian story. But we have to know the antecedents to it as well, and all of it connects up to. You can say it also is a prescient moment in time that predicts and prophesies to the Christian story. So I don't see any contradiction there. But John is also speaking to a part of the story as well. But John's part is a little bit later than this story that we're talking about here. I want to talk about a couple of things here. Beyond, because it wasn't just Saturday. My Saturday was not just the frustration of the boxing match. I mean, I was very disappointed in that. I mean, I'm a boxing fan, so I can't be having my boxer get knocked out in the first round. You can't have that. But there were some successes that occurred Saturday also. One of them was on a program that I was on WFNT. which was Betty Hendricks' program. I have a lot of respect for the work that they do at that station, and also Betty Hendricks has one of the premier shows that comes on at 10 o'clock on Saturdays. And those that did not get a chance to tear into me on that program last week can do so this coming Saturday. I will be ready for you, and any noise you want to make, or you're not ready. But she invited me to come back again next week, which I will in fact do. And what I was trying to do in that program was to talk about the something I wrote about today, as a matter of fact, on my Facebook post. I'm doing a critical piece. It was going to be a two-part series on what amounts to what I call treason in this country, and I accuse both political parties of being involved in treason. I also accuse the newspapers of being involved in it. And I'm talking here about the Constitution of the United States. I consider it this way. It's not very complex for me. I consider it this way. Anytime there's an abrogation of the Constitution of the United States and is knowingly engaged in by the political class and is endorsed through silence by the media, that is treason. It's either treason through omission or commission, or through complicity in the silence, in terms of the media having supposedly the role of keeping the government true to the constitutional mandates. And that's not what's going on here. The media is in fact complicit with the dismissal of the Constitution. And it does it in a couple of ways, and this way in which I'm talking about right now was the abrogation of it in terms of Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Which is the part that deals with the ratification of the treaties that are involved, that are engaged in by this country. And you can push that by those who don't know the Constitution, but I know the Constitution, and you can't push it here. And the best person, the best discussion I've heard about this whole thing, about them hollering about how Donald Trump is in fact negating the treaty with Iran, and he is proposing to go after NBC, and that can't come too soon, for its treasonous behavior, reporting that they had a discussion in one of the meetings of the Trump administration where they were talking about building up their nuclear arsenal so that they can be a deterrent from anyone who wants to come against this country. And why would NBC want to report that? It certainly wasn't reporting it to our benefit. It was reporting it for the benefit of North Korea. And then when Donald Trump starts talking about the licensing of NBC and looking at some possibilities of that, they start talking about the First Amendment as if they care about it. This is not about the First Amendment. The First Amendment does not cover treason. And this idea that you're talking about maintaining a free press, there is no free press in this country. I wrote about that yesterday, and I wrote part 2 today. And when I got through writing part 2, I decided I had to write a part 3 to connect up with it, to deal with something else that's going on, and that's this Harvey Weinstein situation. I'm going to tie that into that, because now I've got to tie in the, how do I say this on the air, the perversion that is taking place, and that's tied into it also. And I'm going to tie that into this discussion about this treason in this country.
Anybody who watches television or movies in particular, if they haven't seen the transition from stuff they wouldn't just simply allow 25 years ago to now, if they're really puzzled by what's going on with Harvey there, let's face it, there's been a total degeneration of going on of the values in Hollywood. I mean, you can see it on the movies. I mean, and if it's going on in their movies, it's going on in their personal lives too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's treason. You can go and look at one of the things I tape on WHT. That's a station, the World Harvest Television Network. I don't know what they're harvesting over there with Jim Baker. You think they're harvesting anything over there, John?
Well, they're bringing the faithless money into them. They're bringing in the sheep. I mean, the sheaves.
Yeah, that's another conversation there. But in terms of they bring the Long Ranger on, and he's on 2 hours. I tape it because I have to watch it later on and get past some. I don't have enough time to be sitting there watching programs and then the commercials. So I have to tape everything. But I noticed in the long range of programs, there's always a moral message in we watching as kids, and it was always, and I can see it now. I couldn't see it then, but the instruction was there, and it always had a little moral tone to it. Sometimes they have children on there to be like obey your parents, and it would have some moral grounding point and things of that sort. And you don't see that now. You see these films made by the kind of people like Harvey Weinstein, and the undercurrent is something very different, and I consider it to be an undercurrent of treason in this country, which is undermining the morality and the moral fiber of the nation. It's unraveling at the seams and causing a fractioning, which David Kapelian calls the snapping of the American mind. And I don't think this is by accident. I think there's there's an undercurrent in this country where there's a deterioration of the culture by design by some very dangerous and very deadly, in a sense, forces that are pushing this culture over to the edge. And there's a certain purpose behind it which has nothing to do, that's to the benefit of this country. We need to pay attention. We need to wake up in this country and understand what is going on with Hollywood and with other strictures as well. I have to tell you something, because when they ratified, they didn't call it ratification of the treaty with Iran, where they took $150 billion and gave it to them to buy them not to do something, which was really a blot on this country's integrity, to be paying the most dangerous exporters of terrorism in this country, in this world, and we are paying these persons to play nice until these people get out of office, so they can claim that they did not have a war on their dime, and then these people come back and then do some on the other side of the agreement and put us in harm's way, as we are right now with what's happening in North Korea. That was incubated over a 25-year period of time. And what was going on during that 25-year period of time up until this time is treason, and now we've got to deal with it because there's nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, and that's not a song anymore.
And then the thing is too, though, you don't hear Trump just saying, whining like a certain guy who just left office about how he inherited a mess. And I mean, he certainly has inherited the biggest mess I think any other president's had.
More so, and nobody has come behind any presidents and have not inherited a certain mess, because no president can fix all of these things, and plus no problems can actually be fixed through politics. I'm trying to get that message across, and every time I write, I try to write so people can understand that this looking for something to be resolved through politics, it cannot be resolved through politics. Politics is not a producer of anything. Maybe noise, but it doesn't produce any product. And it's the producers, the production, that solves problems. You have a need, okay, production will solve the need. You have a need for bread, okay, there's somebody producing bread. That's outside the political arena. The political arena can only move chess pieces around. It always it's involved in robbing Peter to pay Paul, because it doesn't have money to pay both Peter and Paul, but it wants to pay Peter and Paul because that gives them more power. So what it does, it robs Peter, and then it pays Paul with Peter's money. It moves, pieces around. But in fixing that problem where Paul is, Peter is being denied, and therefore, where does Peter get his due? He gets it from postponing the payment of Peter by putting Peter's payment in the future. That's where the national debt comes in. But that is not something you can resolve in politics. And I want persons to be able to learn that lesson. That way we won't be looking for politics to solve into the problems, because no problems can be solved in politics. You'll always have something left over to do once somebody leaves office. And that will always be the case. And we know there'll be a time in which politics will have resolved the problems. Plus, it can't be resolved in that time period anyway, because every generation has to solve its own problems. They won't be solved by what went on in the generation before. Every generation has inherent problems, necessarily so, and has to resolve the problems it inherits by its own means. So I'm not with this idea that you will have a president that doesn't inherit. The question is, what does he do with the inheritance, and to resolve it based upon the inheritance and do some things that will make the problems, lesser, so he's not passing those problems down to the next generation, but resolving it so that he's not going to be compounding it by passing down the problems during his tenure, the president's tenure, and then the problems before that, and pass all those problems down to the next generation, which is what these presidents have been doing. That's why this problem of North Korea has been incubated over a 25-year period of time, and we now got to deal with these problems because there's no handoff that's possible anymore. I mean, look at this guy over there in North Korea. Look at Kim Jong-un. And this guy, his grandfather, Kim Jong-song, and then his son, who is the father of the president, Kim Jong-un, the son of the first leader of North Korea, his son was Kim Jong-il, and then Kim Jong-il, the third person, he was produced by him, and this is Kim Jong-un. And we now got this problem on our hand with this man talking about developing a hydrogen bomb, and he wants to reach into the United States to have the capability, and we cannot allow that to happen. It's just as simple as that. This president is going to have to deal with that. But it would have been much easier to deal with if they hadn't been paying these mullahs off and paying off these dictators to play nice. And did they play nice? No, they became more aggressive. And this is falling on Donald Trump's dime. My question is this. In signing that agreement, in which it was signed, it wasn't ratified in terms of the agreement, because in order to have it ratified, you had to call those Republicans out of the woodwork, and they didn't want to come out of the woodwork and be identified as agreeing with Obama on this. But Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 is very clear. Anytime you have a treaty, it has to be ratified. It can't be ratified by the president. It has to be ratified by the Senate, and not even by a simple majority vote in the Senate. It has to be ratified by a 2/3 vote of the senators. And why the senators? Because at that time when the ratification of the Constitution occurred, it took the senators were to be the representatives of the states, and therefore to require 2/3 of the senators was to require 2/3 of the states to buy into the treaty. Why? Because the treaty would affect the states. And therefore you have to have the states' representatives on board in order to bring about the ratification. That's what the framers had in mind. And it was not to be placed inside of the House for his own reasons, but the states were to be represented at the table of the ratification. And by them going around Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, and having it certified, the only place where there's certification in the Constitution is in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 3. And it's a certification of the, okay, I see the music being played, the certification of the ballot of the Electoral College. We're going to come back with 92.1 WFOV in 4 minutes. They'll be taking a break about now, and we will welcome them back in 4 minutes. Looking forward to that welcoming back at that time. Meanwhile, we're going to go on with our program here at allpointstv.com, and we will continue this discussion about what is happening with the Donald Trump regime and this administration, who's doing a great job, by the way, in terms of standing up to the plate. He's not complaining about it, just that he has inherited the problem. And this problem cannot be passed down any further. We are critical mass right now, and we're going to have to deal with it.
For the first year,
during his first year in administration.
Well, the first year of Obama's first term, he's always him or his defenders are always saying, "Well, he inherited a mess," and let's face it, nobody's inherited. Let's face it. But the thing is, they wouldn't say this. They won't admit to it. It was a member of their party, Bill Clinton, which set up this scenario. What's going on in North Korea? They don't want to admit that. See, the Democrats never have to own up to their bad things. Never have to. Never have to at all. They can find a way of putting it on the Republicans, even if they had nothing to do with it.
Yes, and politicians bear their mistakes. And where they bury it in a place where it cannot be recognized at the point in time in which the burial takes place, because they are smart enough to know where to bury it. They don't bury it in the cemetery. They bury it in the future. And since the future is not gotten here, you can't see it because the future is yet to arrive. But it will arrive, and it's under different names in which it arrives. It arrives, for example, in terms of let's say the treaty we're talking about with Iran. That treaty was supposed to have been for a period of time. Guess when it arrives? It arrives in the future. Or if you put the indebtedness off by borrowing money to pay Peter, because you took Peter's money to pay Paul, then where does Peter's payment come from? It comes from borrowing the money from the prosperity from the future and placing it in the hands of Peter, so Peter won't get mad. And so where is the Peter to be paid from the funds that you're borrowing from him? And that's to be paid in the future by the ones that are not even here yet, not able to vote on it yet. That's called the taxpayers of the future, those not born yet. And they're not here to object to it because that money is being borrowed from those who are not even on the planet. I would say that's pretty clever, isn't it?
What's really more clever is to be the organization that actually gets you to pay them interest on things they create out of nothing, and yet we act as if they actually have some kind of force over us. We're supposed to have oversight on. I'm talking about the Federal Reserve.
Yes.
It's a ridiculous setup. I mean, it's so easily, right out of the gate, so easy to politicize, and we don't actually, with that process, we can't really prioritize. I'm not trying to keep with the rhyme thing, but we keep on allowing these people, and it's a very little oversight on our behalf to who's sitting there in the Federal Reserve System.
John, you're making an excellent point. You know, I don't blame everybody take responsibility for their own actions, but I blame the hidden hand. You know, there's a hidden hand that we have to study it to be able to locate it. There's a hidden hand. And I asked this question yesterday, as a matter of fact, in one of my posts, that when they say, for example, that you start talking about the deep state, there's another name, it's not the same thing as, there's some other components to it that makes it different from the deep state, but they also talk about the shadow government. And I raised this question that's never been raised before, a shadow of what? And I asked this question to raise this question here. What is your shadow of? Your shadow is a shadow of yourself, right? And without yourself being there, there will be no shadow. Would you agree with me on that? So when they say shadow government, then what is it the shadow government a shadow of? It's a shadow of the government. And so, yeah, there is a shadow government. But the shadow government is a shadow of the government. It's just that the government is operating in another purview of itself because it does not want to be held to account. And we're welcoming back now our partners, 92.1, want to welcome you back. We haven't gone too far from where you were when we took a break, and we're always glad to have you back with us. We can't go very far without you because you're a very important part of what we do here at allpointstv.com. And we're just talking about the fact that there are other corridors that we have to look into to understand what's really going on here, because we've all got to have hands on deck right now. We can't have any spectators. You know, we all in this thing together, and we've got to learn to play our part, because if we don't play our part, this experiment can go the way of the world as happened in the past with these democracies, because democracies have to exist, and they can only exist when you have an informed public where you have all hands operating. You know, it's like a watch. You know, all of the units have to be moving in motion together, otherwise it doesn't keep the right time. And if any one part is out of sync, then you start noticing what? The time is off, and it starts losing time, or it goes ahead of time, and it doesn't work because some of the parts are not working in sync with other parts. And we got to all be in sync here, and we can do that, but we got to be paying attention, because we all got a responsibility to be able to pass this inheritance down to our children, and we want to pass it down, quite frankly, in a better state than what we found it was passed down to us. And Donald Trump has got to, and I think he is doing a good job against all of the ones that are coming at him, because they don't want this thing fixed. The ones that broke this, you'd be surprised. Some of the ones who are breaking this this model don't want this model to stand. They don't want this model in the image of James Madison and James Wilson, who I think is really the father of the Constitution, more so than James Madison, although everybody's giving James Madison the credit for it. I've been reading a lot up on James Wilson. I'm convinced that James Wilson was more of a primary figure in the founding of the Constitution and the drawing up and the thinking behind it as James Madison was, although James Madison was very primary to it as well. But when I read James Wilson, I mean, it's incredible. I think he's probably the smartest person at that table in terms of the theoreticals. Hamilton from New York, the only delegate from New York, was premier thinker there as well, and I give him a lot of credit for writing the things that gave us understanding of the mindset at the table, as he wrote 51 of the Federalist Papers. And I give him a lot of credit because without his explaining the mindset at the table, no one would have understood what was going on there. They produced a document called the Constitution. And Hamilton helps the country to understand that, and I think his voice helped to bring about the ratification. So did James Madison, who wrote 29 of the Federalist Papers, and John Jay, to a lesser extent, who wrote 85 altogether. But I think Wilson has played a much more primary role than what history has given him credit for. And when I look at Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, which is the ratification aspect of the Constitution, is James Wilson that's explaining why it went on the way that it went on and why it required 2/3 of the states in order to bring about the ratification. Now they're talking about certification of the agreement. And that's a sleight of hand trick that you're not trained to pick up, of how they did a very shady deal to undercut Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, because certification is not the requirement. The requirement is ratification. But if they talk about ratification, then we have to go to the Constitution and see what the requirements are for it, and the requirements are very clear. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 talks about ratification by 2/3 vote of the senators who are present, and it says that they must concur. And that's not what happened. So they talk about certification because they circumvented the process. And the Democratic Party allowed that to happen, and the Republican Party allowed it to happen, and also the press. They did not call them on it. So they're all complicit, and all of them are involved in treason. I consider treason, by the way, to be any time when the Constitution is not being followed, and the Constitution is explicit in its mandate and is not being followed. I consider any time it is not followed, I consider it to be treason. And an impeachable offense, because the Constitution, Article 2, Section 4, says the President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States. That does not cover the state officers. They have their own Constitution to mandate that. This is for the federal government and the federal officers. So the President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States, the federal government, shall be, it doesn't say can be, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. In other words, it says they shall be impeached. There's no wiggle room in it. And if they are convicted in the trial, which goes in the Senate, then upon conviction, they shall be removed from office. Number 1, for treason. And it says in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, it's there in that document where it says that the House of Representatives shall have sole power, not S-O-U-L, I'm not talking about sole power, I'm talking about S-O-L-E, shall have the only power to bring about impeachment. You can't do it, and I can't do it, and a body outside the House can't do it, because the Constitution requires in Article 1, Section 2, Clause clause, let's see, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, it calls for the House to have the sole power of impeachment. It's there in that particular part of the Constitution. Now, in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6, it says that the Senate should have the sole power to try the impeachment. In other words, then, what you have there is that the House makes the accusation, but the trial doesn't take place there, because you don't want to have the same body to bring about the charge and then try the person on the charge. So that is therefore referred to the Senate. The process is more difficult in the Senate, because you want to make sure that in terms of assuming the overthrow of what amounts to overthrowing the election, you want to make that a much more difficult proposition. Because when you start talking about taking people out of office, you're talking about subsuming the authority of the voters, and that's a very serious matter. So therefore, the trial takes place in the Senate, and then they up the ante in terms of the conviction, because now it takes 2/3 of the Senate to bring about the conviction, where it only took a majority of the members of the House to bring about the accusation or the impeachment. A different process. Impeachment and conviction are two different parts of the same process, but you must have impeachment for and conviction of the charge of the impeachment, and the two together bring about the resolution of the person in office by, in fact, the person must vacate the office, because you can have it vacated based upon impeachment for and conviction of. You must have both parts of the process, in operation. And I think that once you have any violation of the Constitution, that brings about, if you have them true to the Constitution, the invocation of the Constitution by mandating impeachment and removal. It is mandated in the Constitution, and whenever that process is not carried out, you have treason operating within the two political parties in both houses of Congress when that's not brought about and not called for. And I'm writing articles on it right now on Facebook in terms of calling for the invocation of this treason. And they're trying to act like Donald Trump was in fact going to violate the First Amendment and going to violate the free press in this country if he in fact has, if he proposes that we look at the licensing of these bodies like NBC that was out there talking to North Korea in public, talking about what's going on in the central meetings of this country, and telling the enemies of this country what this country is doing in terms of its nuclear, arsenal. That's not for our benefit in our eyes. That's not for our eyes only. That's for the eyes of those persons who are outside this country that are in an antagonistic relationship with the United States of America. And for the NBC to have done that, which we're not surprised by, is treason. We're not surprised by NBC doing that, because look what they did in other cases. Look what they did in the Trayvon Martin case, for example, where they spliced tapes together to make it appear that George Zimmerman was profiling Trayvon Martin based on his race. And then they tried to promote that George Zimmerman was in fact white rather than Hispanic to further racial tensions in the country. That's not freedom of the press in this country. This is mockery of the rule of law in this country. And they want to use the First Amendment protection to hide themselves underneath that, claiming they have First Amendment protection. You do for freedom of speech. You don't have the freedom to sabotage this country. And you don't have the freedom to use the media to engage in treason. That's not in the Constitution. The Constitution speaks against treason. And the press engaging in it, there is no protection for that. But they want to try to act like that's protected. And the question is, why is it that this country, being against Donald Trump, and I'm talking about the country, I'm talking about the House and the Senate, I'm talking about the Republicans and the Democrats, why are they against Donald Trump and siding with Iran in this deal here? And I'll tell you why. These two political parties are involved in treason in this country. And none dare call it treason, but what else do you call it? What is your name for it?
Isn't that weird, though, that years ago, I remember the older guys I talked to are always opposed to everything the government was doing. And when they started on their thing of this is against the Constitution, I'd just see the people around them roll their eyes. And they're always, and they'd come out, the other people who were opposing would always say, like, well, they're doing this for this reason. And it's like, well, then, but the thing is, it wasn't even a slippery slope. But basically, and once you got the social stigma, you didn't want to have that social stigma saying, you know, what about the Constitution? They'll give you like they said, if you want to sound like a quack, to start saying, well, start quoting the founding fathers, and then people in their eyes, you're a quack, you're a wacko. So I mean, especially the left. I mean, they're always coming up with better ways to do everything, you know. And then the next week it's going to be something else better, and they want you to transition to that without a complaint, you know. So
John, I never even hear them talk about the founding fathers and the Constitution until they can do something to indict somebody that really standing up for the Constitution. Then they use it to act like that they are the patriots and that they really believe in such things as the freedom of the press. They don't believe in the freedom of the press or the freedom of speech. Are you kidding me? These people are suppressing speech every day in this country.
Well, didn't Nancy Pelosi, she was it's not right that somebody with a $5 blog, you know, can do this. Well, there was a person who was blogging, or somebody was like, you know, the social media was opposing or calling attention to something they were doing, and she wanted to stop that guy. But in NBC or ABC or what, all these major, the alphabet soup type of people, they can actually, they refuse to actually admit to the fact that they've covered things incorrectly. They also cover up. They don't give all points of view like we try to do here. They basically aren't. They're instrument, part and parcel of the governmental bodies themselves. That's what they are. So why not be licensed by them? Because you're already getting the government's, you know, nod on what you can say or not say anyway. So
it just brings it out into the open more that is how they control what the media does. There's no free press in this country, and you can see the freedom of speech being subjected to the whims of the politicians by them talking about things like hate speech. People think because you put an adjective onto the word speech is no longer protected by the Constitution.
They say we have a right to ban hate speech. They say every kind of speech can be construed as a hate speech by somebody who doesn't want it, who opposes what you're saying. I mean, that's what the Constitution, the Bill of Rights is about. But you can, I mean, in the left, and I should give the guy's name because he's a local business owner. He wanted to get everybody every group that carried, you know, the Cumulus, I think it was. He wanted to get them. He wanted to boycott them because they actually carried Rush Limbaugh show. And I said, what about freedom of press? He goes, what about community standards? I said, oh, so if he opposes your viewpoint, he goes against community standards because you speak for the whole community there. And I wish I'd like to see that guy's business ran out of business. Yeah. I really would, because this guy is a total craphead, in my opinion.
John, I was on a radio show this past, I was telling you about this the first part of the program. I was on a radio show this past Saturday, and I'm going to be back on this program again. Those of you who are waiting for me, you waiting. I hope you do wait, and I hope you'll come on the air and voice your disagreement, because I want to show you something. And what I want to show you is you're not qualified to make the objection. But one of the person told me off the air, once we got off air, one of the guys told me, and I hear this a lot, I absolutely hear this a lot, you know, from people. They'll say, this one guy said, you know, I can't say what you said. In other words, he agreed with what I was saying here about I was talking about Lincoln, and that this war was not over slavery, and that it had nothing to do. I'm the only historian in the country that's going a step forward, a step beyond what even the writer Lerone Bennett, who wrote a book called Force and the Glory. I'm going even one step beyond him, although he gets real close to the issue of the Civil War, talking about Lincoln was forced into glory, but I'm going one step beyond him. And I'm saying that this war had nothing to do at all with slavery. It had to do with, I'm talking about the war. The problem that Bennett has, but he doesn't have as bad as some of the others, is that they have taken the consequence of the war as a cause of the war. Yes, slavery, the consequence of the war was that the slavery was ended in the rebellious states, but it was not in the country. So you got a problem with that, don't you, in terms of trying to say this war is over slavery? Because if the war was over slavery, once the war comes to a close, all slavery would have dissipated. But it did not do that, did it? Slavery does not end in the country until the passage of the 13th Amendment, which was not passed until 8 months later, and by this time Lincoln is in fact dead. So you can't say that the war was over slavery and you had slavery after the war came to a close, because otherwise, how do you see the continuation of it? And the continuation of it continued in the Union states. The rebellious states, the secessionist states, had their slavery ended once the war came to a close, because at that point, when the war comes to a close, as of April the 9th, when Lee surrenders at the Appomattox courthouse in Virginia, when he surrenders at that point, then the Emancipation Proclamation, which only applied to those states in rebellion, could now be enforced. It could not be enforced before the war came to a close. And all you Juneteenth people, they're celebrating Juneteenth as if that would be the end of it, because they heard about the Emancipation Proclamation on June 19th in 1865 in Galveston, Texas, and they therefore were the last ones to hear about it. That does not end slavery either, because it is not ended in the 4 Union states. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't even touch those states. And I'm talking about those states being Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, then over here in Missouri, which was also a Union states, and they had between 500,000 and 800,000 slaves in those states, or approximately, let's see, 1/5 of the slaves in the country at that time of the so-called Civil War. And it's not even a civil war. This is a war between two different countries, that one had succeeded in 1776 and the other one was attempted to succeed in 1861. And so this is a war going on between two different countries. One was the United States of America, and the other one was the Confederate States of America. And these two nations are fighting each other. And that's a whole different discussion about that as well. All I'm doing here is correcting the historians who can't see straight because they're blinded by their own ideological outlook, and I'm not blinded by it. I'm going to tell the truth about what really went on there. But this one guy was telling me off the air, he said that I can't say what you said on the air. And I asked him, why can't you say it? Don't you ever have a mouth? You know, people are just dishonest. And so they've actually abrogated the Constitution in this country through political correctness. And so people do not say certain things because they're afraid of the denigration that goes on if they in fact say it. So they've canceled it out without changing the language of the First Amendment by simply having people to just shut up. And therefore the freedom of speech is even challenged in that way. So you have on the one hand hate speech, and that restricts speech. There is no, it used to be a time we had sticks and stones may break our bones and names won't hurt us. Now we have, if the speech is not palatable to the taste buds of the political class in this country, then it's not to be allowed because it will hurt some people's feelings and therefore to be disallowed. So the only speech we're supposed to have apparently then is a speech in which we all can agree that we're playing nice in this country. And that's not what the Constitution is really about. The Constitution is to protect the speech that is unpopular in the country. And this idea that you had under Oliver Wendell Holmes back in 1919, 1920, when they were throwing people in jail because they had opposed World War I, Oliver Wendell Holmes wanted to justify that by talking about, well, you can restrict the speech because can you go to a theater and holler fire in a theater? Anybody decide that's reasonable? Yeah, that makes sense. But it didn't make any sense. Because you can't say anything in a public theater unless you own a theater. You own somebody else's property. And that's not a speech right, that's a property right. A person that is in a theater has customers buying tickets to the theater. That person is involved in commerce. And the commerce is I buy a ticket to see a movie, and he's contracted with me through my buying of that movie ticket to show me a movie for the price that I paid for it. And you can't have people coming in and interfering with that contract. And there's a property contract that's in place. It's not a speech issue, it's a contract issue. And here's Oliver Wendell Holmes trying to act like you can't holler fire in a theater because you can restrict speech. Nonsense. You can't holler you can't holler the Gettysburg Address in there either. 407 years ago. Try to say that in the theater and see what happens. I was in the theater. I'm going to a theater tomorrow because Tuesday is my movie day. Every Tuesday I'm going to a movie. And I get away for an hour and a half, and I go early in the morning, by the way. Make sure that I don't have a whole crowd there. And I notice it's always silent in there. You know why? Because everybody understands the terms of the contract. You can't be in there. Now, I call sometimes in there. Nobody turns around and says, you know, shh, be quiet. But if you start talking in there, they're going to get the manager and get you removed. Because they paid for that. They paid to see that movie, and they paid for your silence. But that's not a speech issue. It's a contract issue. And Oliver Wendell Holmes used that in 1919 and 1920, talking about you can't holler fire in a public theater, therefore it can restrict speech. And they've been trying that ever since. You can't restrict speech in this country, and you cannot limit it basically because of on your whims through political correctness. Okay, that's kind of going to wrap it up. We run out of time all the time here because we are long-winded, but we hope you learn something from the shows. We want you to watch all the programs here at allpointstv.com and also 92.1. We want to thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, we want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.